morning, Marcelo. It's a little strange to be speaking English to you.
Good morning. Good morning. I hope my English comes through. With you, it's very difficult. I mostly try to understand your Spanish, so you start understanding my English would be an achievement.
Very good. So this is the fourth talk we do at Sacred Heart for this pandemic, and we wanted to talk to an economist. So why would you be a good person to talk about this?
Probably I'm not, because I'm an agnostic observer of economics. I know the power of the science, but I have practiced it for 31 years all over the world. I just retired from the World Bank last week. And in my goodbye, one of my economists referred to me as the director of everything everywhere. I have always changed regions and countries. I've been in many situations, from peaceful transformations to national crises. I have seen economic collapses. I have seen a few successes. I have seen the emergence of Southeast Asia with a lot of success, the perennial problems in Latin America, the birth of the former Soviet Union when they joined the world. I have seen politicians of all kinds, very few of which really impressed me. That's part of my agnosticism. So by now I'm in a contemplative mood more than an actionable mood. And I think the times require action. So let's see how good I am for you and your audience. And by the way, do let me say, I admire what you do. Few pastors, few priests, few shepherds guide people the way you do it when they need it the most. So my hat off to you.
Thank you. And this is not the first time that you address my parishioners, correct?
No, it's not. And I have a great memory of my visit there. As I remember, was one of the 2 days when the sun shined in racing. And it was on a Saturday afternoon, and it was also the day when you have your arts and crafts show. So there was absolutely no reason to come to hear me speak, but all your parishioners came. And they really engaged, and they made me see a lot of the weaknesses in my own presentations. I learned a lot from them. They have this view of the world which is based on a mix of faith and reason that I really was very impressed with.
So let me, I have some questions for you. And the I have is what kind of economist are you? So people know what your perspective is.
People think of economists as politicians. They're economists of the right and economists of the left. Mostly, they think of those on the right as the ones that advocate for small government, balanced budgets, open trade, low debt, light regulation, and fair treatment of investors, both big and small. And then on the other side, you have the so-called left economists, who supposedly want a lot more government presence, more expenditures in education, in health. Some of them go to the extreme of saying the government should guarantee employment to everyone. Now, after so many years seeing economists all over the world, I think I'm leaning more to the ones in the right. Because I have seen with my own eyes, and I have to say, as a born and raised Argentinian, I have suffered on my own skin the problems that come when the governments try to do too much. Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe government has a huge role to play, but only when the private sector cannot play. So if you were to put me in that spectrum, I think I'm center-right. I love to say very quickly, which I use for my kids as well, that I'm very left on the social side of the ledger. I call myself a social progressive, fiscal conservative, because I do believe in freedoms and respect and tolerance and acceptance and embracing. So I'm a weird mix, but I prefer to think of economics as a science. You don't go to your cardiologist to say, are you a cardiologist that intervene in my heart, or are you a cardiologist that you don't? You just say, what is the science today? What is the most we know, and you follow that.
So that, priests are also considered either right or left, and I want to claim a very strong center. And also in the economy, I told you before we connected that I think you don't understand, or you don't have a fair assessment of my economic position. But that's for,
oh,
that's
no,
for another.
I had to say, I didn't want to say it, but priests are in a way like economists. No, you can also put them somewhere in the spectrum. The difference with economics is that you cannot choose a church to go according to the economist that will be preaching that day. Economists show up in every church. Wherever you go, see an economist that thinks in a different way from you. With the church, it's mostly you go to the same place and you know what to expect.
It's changing a little bit now with all this online access. I have all friends watching my match from many different places. So let me start with the questions.
Please.
You know what kinds of questions I have. So one that I think that it's in people's minds, how bad do you think this pandemic is affecting the economy here in the US, but maybe worldwide as well?
If you take a photograph, it's the worst I ever seen, and I dare to say the worst any living economist has ever seen. Collapse in output, brutal as it's going to be, 20% comparing this quarter with the same quarter a year ago. That's gigantic. 1 in 5 Americans are out of employment. And we expect worse to come in the next few weeks. Now, that's a photograph. If you were to take a movie, then you may be surprised how quickly this recovery takes place, or how slowly it takes place. Some people speak of the V-shape, go deep down and then shoot back up. Others speak of the U-curve, meaning it goes deep down and takes a long time to come back up. Mm-hmm. And others are saying this is going to be like an L. It's going to stay down probably for a long, long time. I feel that the answer is technical and belongs more to the medical science than the economic science. And I feel it will depend not so much on the cure, but on the vaccine. If there is no vaccine, then the new normal will be very different from the past, and we can talk about that. If there is a vaccine, we may go back to what will look like the crazy times up to 2020, and we may go back up very quickly. There are good reasons for that. We can discuss that. So that's my assessment. It's extremely bad today, and what happens next is a spectrum. It could go all the way from being short and painful, or be very long and protractedly painful.
First of all, you are the fourth talk. The third one was about vaccines and treatments. So we kind of, with two scientists, we were able to discuss this. Your answer gave me two more questions. One, first of all, an economist, so the official data for unemployment is 15.7% right now, but a very famous economist said that we should really say 20%. Would you know what's the difference between 15.7 and this very famous economist who said we should really save 20%? What's the difference?
If you are talking about unemployment, the difference is huge. We are talking about several million people out of work. I would think that by now it's 20%, because every remaining impact on services has already played out, all the way from airlines to restaurants to entertainment, personal services, including dentists and doctors. So that took some time to lock down, and by now is there. So I wouldn't be surprised if the new numbers are 20%. By the way, at the moment, we have 33 million Americans out of work. And the weekly numbers on the so-called first-time unemployment claims, somebody gets unemployed, you rush to the unemployment office, which, by the way, is a state-level office, and you apply. And you try to do it quickly, because every week that passes is money that you lose. So those first claims come out every Thursday. And the usual numbers when things are bad are about 30,000, 50,000 for the whole of the US. That was the past. As of early April, the weekly numbers were in the millions, 2 million, 3 million, numbers that were a dimension different from the past. So yes, it's pretty bad. And, being in unemployment insurance, meaning to claim those benefits, doesn't relieve the pain, because there are all kinds of other connotations and consequences of being unemployed, psychological, family, logistical, and so on.
And the other question that I was thinking about your answer is that Wall Street, and people talk about the difference between Wall Street and Main Street. And we know that the stock market has taken a hit, but at the same time, there are days that we have terrible reports coming, terrible news, and the Dow Jones gets up 400 points. How do you explain that?
Yeah, there is a gap between Wall Street and Main Street. A bit of it is statistical, meaning it's a rebound. It collapsed very quickly, much faster than the economy. In a question of a week or two, we lost 20% of value. The stock market as a whole, I'm talking about. So a little rebound was to be expected. It was an overshooting downwards. But there is also something fundamental as to how the economy works. The so-called real economy data, unemployment, GDP, manufacturing output, those data come with a lag. It's data that comes from the past. Normally it's a month, we are lucky a couple of weeks, but it's always from the past. We are reading what has already happened. The stock market and the indexes are a reflection of what investors think is going to happen in the future. So what investors are now betting on is how long will it take for life to go back to normal. And with the pressure to so-called reopen the economy, to relax the lockdown regulations, investors are saying, oh, companies will go back to what they were before. We better buy now that they're cheap. And that drags the market up. One way to also look at it is check within a single day news on medical progress, be that good result out of some trial for some vaccine, or a reduction in the number of cases reported as infections or death. Anything that was unexpectedly good news drags the market up. And again, it's because the stock market, Wall Street, is forward-looking. You don't invest on the basis of what has already happened. You invest on the basis of what you think is going to happen. So I'm not too worried about this gap. Of course, it's a public relations problem for Wall Street banks, no? Because they look like they're in a party while everybody else is crying back home. But it's at the core of how economies work. It's not only the US, it's everywhere.
About reopening the economy, I have two questions. One, I think you told me, or I read someplace, not always I can blame you for everything I read about the economy, is that every month that the economy remains shut down in the US, it's like a 2% growth loss, something like that. Could you explain how shutting down an economy affects the GDP growth?
Well, let me put it like this. The GDP is the value of all the goods and services that are produced by a country, and more specifically by the production factors of a country, be that its people, its capital, its endowments, land, other resources that they may have. When you put all those together and they start producing, at the end of the year, you say, okay, what is the value of all the goods and services that you have produced? That's the GDP. So if you suddenly, no, in the U, just to give an idea, the GDP in the US is about $20 trillion. Okay? And for the world as a whole, it's about $80 trillion. So the US is about a quarter of the world's GDP. Now, if during 55 weeks or 52 weeks a year, you produce 20 trillion, and suddenly for 8 weeks you produce nothing, the final value will be less. Okay? Now you can then chop that into the number of weeks and say, okay, for these weeks, I'm losing 2% of the final value. That's a very, how can I say, mathematical calculation. Economically, it may not happen like that, because it may be that you stop for a week and then you produce twice as much the following week. So how week to week the economy works, first we don't know, because we don't collect data that good. So it's all estimates done on desks by people like me, observers. And I say, yes, they are good indications, but nothing you should guide your investment decisions by. Because they change. Week to week, these things change a lot.
The other question I have, it's more almost maybe an anecdote, but you know, as I suppose you follow the reality here, and in Argentina, I follow the reality here, and in Spain. And one thing I noticed is that in both places, government was trying to say that schools should be one of the first places to reopen. And it was difficult for me to understand at first why two different governments in two different places would make it a priority to reopen schools.
It's pure logistics, and I would even say family logistics. Behind every student, on average, it's not always the case, on average, you have 2 workers. So when the child cannot go to school, at least one of those workers has to become a caretaker of the child, and he cannot go to work. Remember, for the vast majority of jobs, telecommuting, home-based work is not possible. So that's the logistical explanation. If you hold the kid at home, at least one parent cannot go to work. There is another explanation, which I know a lot less about, and is that it seems that the mainstream of the medical science believe that children are less prone to either be infected or develop the disease, in this case, COVID-19. So there is a branch of thinking saying, let's send the kids back to school, let's reopen the schools, because they are less likely to be infected, and that releases the parents to go to work. It's a totally medical decision, because very much like today, we may find people pushing to send the kids to school. If we have a surprise and suddenly we lose a disproportionate number of children to the disease, the political backlash will be so much that we have to go in a double lockdown. Everybody has to be home no matter what. Remember, this lockdown is a generator of inequality, because this idea that there will be a mom or a dad sitting by the laptop helping the teacher deliver the class online is a minority idea. We have a large portion of our children who simply don't have that kind of home where either the mother or the father will sit in front of a laptop. Many of them may have a laptop given to them by the school, but they don't have Wi-Fi at home. So homeschooling, or let me put it like this, home-based learning is not as automatic as we think. So we are leaving a portion of our students behind, which is widening that learning gap. And that's why some people say, let's send everybody back to school quickly.
Continuing with a very clear explanation, continuing with the issue of government intervention, you did say that the economy of the US, to give us an idea, is $20 trillion. Congress and the president approved 8 legislation that was, I believe, $2 trillion. How do we normal people like me understand intelligent financial people like you when we are talking about these numbers? What did you feel about the legislation? What do you feel about probably the one part that made it to the news, these famous $1,200 checks that the government decided to make part of government, which is Congress and the president? What do you think about all this part about government intervention?
I think there was no choice but to mobilize the government to push the economy forward. And the government is doing that by saying to people, you're not getting your wages, but you're getting this cash that I'm going to give you. So please continue consuming. That's essentially what that contract looks like. Instead of you staying at home and trying to consume the least possible, at the moment when the economy needs you to go out and consume, I'm going to give you some money for you to keep some consumption going, and therefore employment not collapsing as badly as it would if there was no stimulus package. That's how it's called, the stimulus package. Now, $2 trillion is, how do you figure that number? No, I mean, we don't have a trillionaire in the world, just to give you an idea. We have many billionaires, but at least not yet. We don't have a trillionaire. But the way you should think about the size of this stimulus package is like if you were to work 5 weeks of the year for the government. It's 10% of the economy. And that's 10% of your 52 weeks of work. So assume that the families, the labor force of the US is giving 5 weeks of the year to the government, for the government to be the one that then transfer money to consumers for consumers to keep the economy going. Now, how does it actually get paid? Who pays for this? Well, it's debt. It's debt. The government is going to borrow that money. So essentially what we are saying is this generation will pass on the cost of saving the economy today to the next generation. That debt, most of these so-called treasury bills that get issued are maturity 30 years. So what you're going to see is that national debt will balloon, and that means your children will be responsible for paying it off or rolling it over to their children. But most likely you have to pay higher taxes to pay it back. Now, you will say, is that fair? Well, it depends on where you stand. If you think that without the stimulus package, the economy will completely collapse, then your children will certainly have no opportunities. You prefer to borrow and pass on the debt, but at least they will have a functioning economy to go by. If you think, on the other hand, that the economy was going to fix itself somehow without the government intervening, you tend to think this is fiscally responsible. Most economies, even the ones center-right, the ones that believe in small government and balanced budget, they are all in agreement with the stimulus package. That's how serious the situation is. Remember, this is external to government policy. This is a virus. So it wasn't a mistake by the government. It wasn't a mistake by banks. You cannot blame this one on the usual suspects. This is completely outside I would say, the normal actors. And therefore, the decisions that we have to make are a little different from the past.
But when the government, I agree with you, but when the government sends me $1,200, they think I will do with this money better than they would do?
Uh, Not necessarily. No, I don't think that's what they think. Although they should. If you ask me, I think individuals know better what they need. But they want to make sure that you don't contract your consumption too much out of fear for having lost your job, for seeing your 401k cut in half, for hearing that your neighbor has to close down his company or his restaurant. So the psychological implication of having that check is what is behind this. Plus a lot of politics. The government is helping me, not abandoning me. Remember, you are going to get the 1,200 plus the unemployment insurance, which is about $600 a week, at least for a while. So that is the minimum a government needs to do to show that it cares. That's why I don't see much opposition to it. Now, let me also say, a lot of riders are jumping onto this horse, okay? Because the idea of giving what's called the universal basic income to every citizen of each country, whereby the government will deliver you $1,000 a week, sorry, a month, I should say, $1,000 a month, just because you're a citizen. That idea was under debate, particularly in the very rich countries. And it was even exercised in some countries, Finland, Holland, and some evaluations had just come out, particularly for Finland, where it shows that contrary to expectations, people that receive this UBI, Universal Basic Income, do not slack up, do not quit work, do not just go lazy. On the contrary, they make smart investments. Maybe they send their kids to a better university, or they themselves train for something that they always wanted to train but never had the money for. Very little impact on luxury consumption. And this is for countries that are already very rich. So that debate with this new stimulus package will be different in the future. I expect this to continue happening for a while.
Continuing with this line of questioning, I think you know what's coming next.
I feel it.
From my very strong center position, I do find it interesting that conservative economies or center-right, as you describe it, it seems to me that capitalism works perfectly until something happens. Then we make the government responsible for the remedy, and then we need government money. You know, some people think this way, and I'm objectively wondering if that's what people are asking. And for instance, I think you will say that this pandemic is responsibility of the public sector. For me, it sounds like when things go well, no government. When things go bad, government. How would you, and I'm not, you know what I mean? I believe there is an answer, so I would like to know what you think.
I think the way you put it, crude as it may sound, I would say characteristically crude, is correct. The way at least I conceive of the role of government is to do the things, to limit itself to doing the things that the private sector cannot do or has no incentive to do by itself. For example, you cannot say national defense will be left to the private sector. From now on, the army reports to Amazon, Jeff Bezos. You cannot say that the judicial system will be run now by Uber. So who is guilty and who is not is decided by Uber. You couldn't say that response to natural disasters will be left to the private sector. If they see profit in helping in Katrina, they do. If not, they don't. Or environmental protection. So every oil company can drill and spill as much as it wants. There are vaccination. I cannot say let's leave it to those that can pay to vaccinate, because then it's pointless to pay, because you may get, to those that need it the most may never pay. So small government doesn't mean weak government, nor does it mean withdrawal. Now, in a case like this, only the government has the incentive and the capacity to carry the economy forward, to push forward. no investment bank, large as some of them are, can take the responsibility on its own to say, I'm going to save the American economy. Just, they won't do it. You can't go to your shareholders and say, we're going to lose money and send $1,200 to every American simply because we love America. You couldn't do that. So it's true that when things go bad, you look at government, as it should be. Okay? Now, but then you say, well, how about in normal times? What are the activities that governments should take responsibility for compared to the private sector? And of course, the one that everybody fights over here in the US is health, which a foreign-born person like me finds very puzzling, because nobody questions that education through high school should be public. But when you say, should basic health for children be public, people go crazy. The debate explodes. No, the parents should be responsible enough to pay for the children's health insurance. Well, what happens if they cannot pay? So I see more of a debate in normal times than in abnormal times. I think a government that acts as a lender of last resort, as an emergency responder of last resort, as a protector of last resort, policing, national defense, is playing its correct role. Okay? I don't see that as a sign of capitalism be backwards. Now, let me also say, querido Ricardo, let me say I worked in the Soviet Union when it collapsed. Okay? Remember, people, my former staff says Marcelo was the director of everything everywhere. Okay? So one of those places was the Soviet Union. So when everything collapsed in the early 90s, we're all running to help the 27 former Soviet republics become now part of the, I would say, multilateral, market-driven, democratic world. And so we went there. And I witnessed how disastrous the experiment was. How the idea that a bunch of very educated mathematicians and engineers sitting in Moscow could tell the 27 republics what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And the millions, I would say billions of people under that umbrella would do exactly what they were told in Moscow, just out of fear. Okay? If you didn't produce milk in Lithuania, which is a place that 10 months of the year is frozen, but somehow in Moscow decided that milk had to be produced in Lithuania, if you didn't, they would send you to Siberia. So somehow you do something for the cows to produce milk, even though you have to feed them and heat them up in basically houses. There was no way to do it otherwise. So you go completely crazy. Now, why do I say this? Because now imagine the same system that couldn't deliver milk, let alone blue jeans. And I remember paying for my hotel bills with blue jeans. That was the currency. You would carry packs of blue jeans and pay with that. Now, that system now being trusted with resolving a pandemic like the one we have today, with stimulating the economy, with putting real money in the pocket of people, with debating how quick to reopen or not. I don't know that the communist system, if you want to call it like that, although it's properly called central planning, that system of central planning would be much more effective than capitalism to deal with a crisis like this. We don't have a counterfactual. By my experience, the scars in my back tell me that it would be more of a problem than it is today with capitalism.
So you're lucky I'm a priest, and I'm a merciful priest, not a journalist. I would have said that that was a very long answer for a very simple question. And I'm, I'm joking.
I beg forgiveness.
Also following with this line of questions, both in the US and in Spain, I've seen this very interesting discussion about who has the authority. Once we speak government, what about local government versus global government? Here in the US is the federal government versus the states. In Spain is the autonomic regions versus the government. What has an economist? We are not political science people here. We are discussing economy. What does an economist feel about this tension between who has the power to do what, which seems to happen in two different countries?
Sure. Let me say, Ricardo, in normal times, federalism, that's what we're talking about. The idea that the government at the center will not do anything that can be done by the immediate lower level of government. That idea, which by the way is enshrined in the Constitution in the US and was then copied literally throughout the world, it was the big illumination of the founding fathers. That idea is very popular. People like the idea that their public services are not decided in Washington, but they decided at the lowest possible level of government, including sometimes in counties. If you think about education in the US, it's a county decision. That's why there are these supervisory boards. Why do people like this? Because it helps you hold your public officials accountable. It's a lot easier to go and complain that your school is not performing if the person responsible for those decisions, say budget decisions, is a neighbor, than if the person is the president of the US. You will never even get to the president of the US, no matter how many letters you send. So decentralization of decision making, this federalism, subsidiarity is called, is very popular in normal times. In crisis times, complicates life, okay? Because then you need coordination. And at the time of coordination, people say, wait, don't stop on my turf. Okay? This is my prerogative as a governor of my state. And even the mayors may say, this is my prerogative as mayor of my city. Now, each of these people have a different reality, particularly political reality, so they may not all act together. And in a crisis like this, when you need the whole country to do the same thing, everybody got to lock down in under the same parameters, and nobody follows those parameters, or they follow their own parameters, things get a lot more complicated. Do notice that the federal government, the White House, issues guidelines. That's the word they use. They don't issue orders. And whenever they try to use the word order, the governors jump and say, you don't order me. Which, in a way, we call it the tragedy of the commons. Meaning, if we all acted together, we will all be better off. But individually, we all want to be independent. Spain is the same case. Perhaps even worse, because you have very important cultural differences from region to region, even language differences, as you know very well. And those make things more complicated. Yes, there's no question about it. Federalism and crisis don't go as well as unitarism, that's the opposite, and crisis.
Another concept that this pandemic may challenge is the idea of globalization. We know I think you and I would agree that globalization should be a positive in ideas, movement of people and capital and I'm missing a word in English, but you know what I mean, products that move freely. But globalization has been one of the reasons why this pandemic has been so terrible, so difficult. What would you say about that? Can we have an economy that, will the pandemic mean the end of globalization for the economy?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Globalization, for all its problems, has been a net blessing for the world. The idea that goods and some services will be produced wherever is cheaper, that idea has made us all better off. If you don't believe me, just grab your cell phone, your iPhone, and ask yourself how much more expensive this thing, which has inputs from about 40 countries, an average iPhone has input from 40 countries, meaning the rubber is from Vietnam, the glass is from the UK, the programming is from California, the whole thing is assembled in Taiwan, 40 countries. They made this the cheapest possible, $200 maybe. If this thing was to be produced exclusively in the US, where, by the way, one component is lithium that comes only from Bolivia, you would otherwise not have the iPhone or pay $20,000 for it. So what globalization has done is that it gives purchasing power to our salaries, meaning with our wages, we can buy more. And that makes us obviously better off. Are there problems with globalization? A lot of them, particularly people that had to give up on their trade, their profession, their factories, and see those jobs shipped away. Yeah, those people needed to be helped, to be retrained. And many governments did not deliver the help. So you have a lot of discontent in globalization. Now, will that change? Will the globalization disappear with the pandemic? My answer is no. It will be different, but it will not disappear. Now, why it will not disappear? Because the profit motive, the need to bring products and services to clients at the cheapest possible way will still remain. Okay? Now, if you see which store has become the center of American purchasing life during the pandemic, is Walmart. And in Walmart, 90% of what you touch is produced abroad, mostly in China. Now, if you were to say, no, now we're going to do all this in the US, you will pay probably 3 times as much for the same items. Now, where do I think globalization will change, even though it will not stop, is in some sectors, particularly safety of supplies for medicine, medical supplies, and food. I think countries will do to medical supplies and food what they do to defense. They will try to produce it at no matter what cost within their borders, because there is this political perception that when the time came and we had to defend ourselves from the pandemic, we didn't even have masks or ventilators. So there will be politics involved in this, showing to the voters, to us, the citizens, yes, we are going to ensure, even if you have to give subsidies to some firms, that these medical supplies and food supplies are guaranteed no matter what happens to the world. How long it will take for us to go back to a full globalization minus medicine and food? I would say a couple of years, but not too long, Because again, whatever is produced at the cheapest possible location is what consumers will be demanding. Nobody will want to go back to paying $10,000 for a TV set. That's for sure.
So we'd have the next question about bringing out your crystal ball and telling us about how do you see the economy post-pandemic, assuming that we do find a vaccine, assuming that we control it, what would the economy look like? Do you think you already answered, or is there something else you would say?
I think you hit it right on the nail, Ricardo. It's only the pandemic that will bring the economy to what we knew before. Sorry, it's only the vaccine that will bring the economy to what we knew before, not the cure. And that's a big difference. Why do I say that? Because suppose there is no vaccine, okay? Then the provision of person-to-person services, any service that requires person-to-person contact will be logistically much more expensive. Firms, from airlines to your dentist, will have to take precautions. Okay. Why? Not so much because they care about your health, which I hope they do, but rather because it will be legally liable. Okay. Look, my dentist didn't wear gloves or mask or didn't clean immediately after the previous patient, or the airline is packing people up and transmitting the virus. Now, that legal liability may not yet be enshrined in law, but it's enshrined in people's perception. So there will be a reputational issue as well. So everyone that deals with services will require a new logistics that will make things a lot more expensive. Not to speak about restaurants, of course. I mean, those will be really much more expensive than before. I don't even want to touch this point because I'm a sport fanatic like you are, but massive human gatherings to watch something like people running behind a ball, whether it's an oval ball or a round ball, or the ball bounces, or you use your hand, or you don't use your hands, or it's a big ball or a small ball that you bat with, all those things will be very difficult to bring back if there is no vaccine. Again, the cure is not enough because I get sick, I sue you. And if you want to show that you did your best, the logistics will be so expensive that then my ticket to go and watch the Cardinals will cost me $500, not $50. The moment the vaccine is there, all this disappears. And then we go back. Because then people will say, look, you should have vaccinated yourself. If I catch polio going to watch the Redskins in the stadium, well, you should have vaccinated yourself. It's very difficult to be legally liable for somebody catching polio in the Redskins stadium when there is a vaccine that you didn't take. So to me, the high watermark will be the vaccine. Now, having said that, there will be lingering effects, a lot of lingering effects. For example, I think we should have people save more, which in the US is anathema. People here don't save. On the contrary, they think that they can borrow and therefore they buy the bigger car when the existing car will do. But why not borrow and buy the new technology? Which is good for the economy, but if you think about your own personal finances, saving is not your priority. I think it will be much more conscious about saving. Ditto for governments. I think we economists are going to be advocating to governments that they should really have a rainy fund instead of just spending all the money and running deficits forever, particularly at the local level. I think states and municipalities will be much more pressed to show that they are preparing for the next one, now that this is a reality. And there I want to make a footnote. We now deal with a medical crisis. One day we might have to deal with an environmental crisis. So we may now be more attuned, more accepting of governments putting money aside for those purposes too.
Would you say, because you like to call what I do my profession. In my profession, I have had to learn a lot. You know, I'm broadcasting, we are doing lots of videos, we are trying to connect with people in different ways. We had to learn a lot, I believe, priests. What about economists? What are you learning? Would that be one thing that the economists are learning? And any silver lining for the economy or through this experience?
By the way, you mentioned something that is calling my attention. I've been looking at institutions that have been able to adapt and those that refuse to. And to my surprise, the church has adapted a lot and very fast. This idea that the church cannot change may be theologically true, that's your expertise, but it's not logistically true. Okay, so I had to take my hat off to people like you in the church and say, okay, let's move quick and let's adapt.
Well, this is like countries, eh? There are different parishes, different...
I imagine.
So I wouldn't make general statements.
I imagine. The time will come when leadership is judged. And as I say, I'm pleasantly surprised with the type of work you people do, particularly your generation within the church. Now, for economists, we pretend that we learn a lot. You know? So, for example, now we say no more in-person conferences. We were doing too many. You know? Economists were flying everywhere. There was this motto that if you want to travel, be an economist or a pilot, but better be an economist because you will travel even more than the pilot. So these are the trivial logistical pieces of learning. There are some fundamental lessons. I mentioned to you the need for fiscal savings, which nobody wants to talk about, the rainy funds that governments should hold. I think the deepest of all lessons has been our inability as a profession to answer this impossible trade-off between lives and livelihoods. Okay? Yeah, we try to masquerade and dance around the idea that, well, we don't have to choose, that protecting lives and livelihood can go together. And it's probably contextual. You can find places where you say, look, by protecting lives and keeping people away, say in education, we're protecting also livelihoods because these kids will learn and in the future they will be better workers and earn more money. That's all true. But the fundamental question remains. At some point, we should be able to calculate how many people will die because the economy is closed. Okay? Now, in America, where you see all this wealth and prosperity and big houses, you tend to think, well, you know, that won't happen here. I hope you're right. In the developing world, where I spent my previous 31 years, I can tell you right now, people are dying because of the world economy stopping. The livelihoods have been affected, if not disappear. So for them, this is lives now. When and how we calculate the timing of switching or the timing of reopening has been a failure of the profession. I think the lesson is we need to think about these moral questions more. We've been dodging them, of course. It's comfortable. Who wants to write a paper on this? And then you have half of the population against you. So I think we need to be brave or braver and deal with it. Now, on the second point, the silver lining, you know, I teach at Georgetown, and I'm a rookie teacher.
I thought you were retired. So tell us, you were working for the World Bank, but you are not really retired.
Can you imagine? About 6 months ago, I started teaching at Georgetown, and I'm the rookie teacher. No, I don't know what I'm doing really. I mean, I just explain things as if it were my kids.
Or your priest.
Or my priest. That's very true.
How many times you have explained things to me? You know, I call you often.
Yeah. I had to say, not as many as you have explained things to me. And I'm much less intelligent than you are. But is there a silver line? I told my students, because imagine for them, where these kids are graduate students, they pay a fortune to sit in this university physically with these professors speaking to them. So we did 2 months of presential classes, and suddenly, boom, they're all told to go online. And their lives goes up. It's turned upside down because they had to evacuate the dorms, they had to find apartments. Many of them are foreigners, so they tried to go home and they couldn't. I had one of my students getting stuck in London. She couldn't go all the way to South Africa. So their lives miserable. And then they had to reconnect with no interruption, even by a week. They had to reconnect online and follow my class online. So big situation. I was thinking, what can we learn out of all this? My students and I stop our technical macroeconomics. That's what they teach them. And say, okay, let's say what we learn. And they brought things up, like, well, you know, my Zoom sucks. Or I had to now share a room with 6 different people and they're all noisy. You know, details, or applying for a visa to my own country is a problem. Now, the one thing that we all agree on, and I think is the biggest silver lining to me and to them, and I hope to most of us, is the revaluation of low-skill, low-pay work. We now realize that the survival of our way of living, the survival of market-based civilization, you bring an asset to the market and you buy another asset with yours, money in exchange for food. The very basic of our civilization is on the backs of very low skill, very low pay workers. So the way I look at truck drivers, grocery workers, certainly hospital janitors. We all focus on the doctors and the nurses. How about the person that goes and cleans the floor after that patient died and blood went all over the place? Most of whom have no benefits themselves. And the fact that they kept going because it was essential to our society, that to me, that revaluation is a huge silver lining. I think what's going to come after this is that when these people now unionize, because they will unionize much stronger, and get a new voice, and are part of contingency plans in governments, when the government said, okay, if the next pandemic comes, who is going to drive that truck? Imagine the truck that delivers gasoline. We never planned for those guys to be off sick. So we need to make sure that there is someone to replace them and that they have health insurance so they continue going to work. They are not afraid of working. This is going to reevaluate for all of us, who is important and who is not. I always thought that cool people were the likes of Leo Messi, famous soccer player in your beloved Barcelona, or Jennifer Lopez, or Elon Musk, the guy that owns Telsa. Now, when I look at them, streaming from their houses in their comfort of their mansions, and then I look at the guy that I have been seeing but never really focusing on, stacking the shelves in my local giant, and I compare the two, I don't know, I have a different view of things. Who is cool and who is not? So I think this is, frankly, my silver lining. I think we're going to be a better society out of it. I hope so.
So you once told me that, I remember when I had recently met you, that you said that sometimes when you talk to a journalist, they ask whatever they want because you answer whatever you want also. Today you have been very faithful to my questions. Is there anything that you would have liked to explain that I didn't ask you about? Is there anything left to say?
Look, the one thing I miss in all this is hugs, literally. Going close to people and hugging them, and interacting in a very presential way. And I was hoping that you, my church, were going to somehow teach us to hug at a distance. Have you seen this? Have you seen ways where people now hug? I'm guessing this program that you are putting online today is part of the hugging. But have you seen any methodologies? I feel terrible about this. This is the part that I miss the most. I'm a Latino, so the Latinos are very expressive. I fear that we may lose that. From now on, we're always going to be 6 feet apart.
Yeah, for me, the answer would be the interview was for you and for economy, not about this one. But I would say that for me, a physical hug is a symbol of a connection between two human beings. So for me, it was very important from the very beginning to engage people and to make sure that I would be just a bridge for people to know each other, And for me, that's like a hug. It represents what a hug represents. I know it doesn't have the physical aspect, obviously, but I thought it was very important, at least as a shepherd of a community, that people would engage with one another. And I think that's what we did here. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you.
Well, Marcelo, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm not sure anybody would be watching this video at the end of it. It's been quite a long conversation. But thank you very much for answering our questions. I don't understand how the World Bank could lose a person like you. How would you, with this powerful mind, would be retired or partially retired? But I'm very thankful that gave us more time to prepare and do this.
Ricardo, let me say thank you for inviting me. As you know, I admire your work much more than the work I do or did until I retire. Let me wish the best to your community. They're lucky to have you. And if I can help in any way going forward, please count on me. Thank you. Thank you so much.